Hey listeners, this is Peter, and welcome back to the History Shorts podcast. This humble show is brought to you by the Podcast Republic, your ultimate listening app. Discover and subscribe to thousands of podcasts from around the globe, yours truly included, and all in one place. Download Podcast Republic now, available on Google Play and the Apple App Store. Today on History Shorts. The modern Olympic Games are widely recognized as the pinnacle of athletic achievement, a global stage on which speed, strength, and endurance are celebrated. Yet in the early decades of the modern revival of the Games, the Olympics encompassed far more than just mere physical competition. When Baron Pierre de Coubertin, the French educator and aristocrat, spearheaded the revival of the Olympic Games in 1896, he envisioned an event that celebrated the, and I quote, whole man, an ideal that married body and mind, athleticism and intellect, physical prowess, and artistic creativity. In keeping with this holistic vision, the Olympic program for the first half of the 20th century included competitions in literature, music, painting, sculpture, and architecture alongside conventional athletic events. Among these, the inclusion of poetry, sometimes referred to as epic poetry or just lyric competition, stands as one of the most curious and largely forgotten aspects of Olympic history, reflecting both the ambitious cultural aspirations of the early Olympics and the eventual practical limits of integrating the arts into an international sporting spectacle. Here is the rest of that story.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
The roots of Coubertin's initiative to make the newly revived Olympics of the 19th century more holistic go back to his deep engagement with classical antiquity. The ancient Olympic Games held in Olympia from 8th century BCE until the Roman ban in 393 CE were not exclusively athletic competitions. Victors were celebrated with statues, poetic tributes, and musical dedications, and the games themselves were part of a broader festival that included religious and artistic elements. Coubertin sought to revive not merely the athletic contests, but also the integrative vision, believing that art and sport were complementary expressions of human excellence. In his writings, he argued that, and I quote, all competitions, whether of body or mind, should be encouraged and awarded, end quote, emphasizing the moral and cultural embodiment that artistic achievement could provide in conjunction with physical contest. This philosophy formed the intellectual justification for including literary competitions in the Olympic program, positioning poetry alongside athletics as just a measure of human virtue. The first Olympic arts competition were officially held during the 1912 Summer Games in Stockholm, Sweden. The program included 5 broad categories: architecture, literature, music, painting, and sculpture. Within the literature category, poetry was featured under subcategories such as lyric works, dramatic works, and epic works, although these classifications were loosely defined and evolved much more over time. Medals were actually awarded by international juries composed of scholars, critics, and artists, and entries were required to be inspired by a sport or the Olympic ideal. The rules stipulated that works had to be original and previously unpublished, ensuring that the competition celebrated innovation as well as inspiration. Though the concept seemed extraordinary from a contemporary perspective, it did reflect the high cultural ambitions of the early Olympic organizers, who imagined an Olympiad as a festival of human spirit in all of its manifestations, obviously both physical and intellectual. Despite its lofty aims, the literary component of the Olympics faced numerous practical challenges from its inception. One persistent difficulty was the subjective nature of judging artistic work, which contrasted sharply with the objective measures of athletic performance. where a 100-meter dash could be timed to the 100th of a second. Poetry and other artistic entries relied on juries' interpretation of the aesthetic merit, thematic relevance, and originality, a criteria that were inherently variable. This subjectivity led to controversy, with some jurors favoring technically accomplished but uninspired works, while others emphasized the power of emotion or symbolic resonance. Nationalistic biases occasionally surfaced as well, as jurors tended to favor entries from their own countries or linguistic traditions. These challenges were further compounded by logistical issues, such as the difficulty of assembling international juries, the uneven submission of entries, and the challenge of translating poetry across languages while still preserving nuance, rhythm, and meaning. As a result, early poetry competitions often received limited attention relative to the athletic events, and coverage in contemporary newspapers was sporadic and quite uneven. One of the earliest recorded medalists in literature was a Danish poet, writer, and painter Axel Hansen, who received recognition for a work inspired by gymnastics. Similarly, the 1924 Paris Games awarded medals to the Italian poet Riccardo Barthelemy for a lyric composition celebrating the spirit of sportsmanship. These works, though largely forgotten today, reveal the seriousness with which some artists approached the competition and the extent to which the Olympic ideal could inspire creative expression. Beyond the winners themselves, the competitions attracted submissions from writers, musicians, and artists seeking international recognition, offering quite a rare intersection between elite art and global sporting spectacle. Poetry, however, was not the only unusual event included in the early Olympic program. And the broader category of artistic contests included several disciplines that now appear, weird or extraordinary. Architecture competitions, for example, invited designs for stadiums, gyms, and other sports-related structures, while music competitions featured orchestrated composition, choir works, and even experimental scores. Painting and sculpture submissions often depicted athletic figures, heroic feats, and allegorical representations of the Olympic spirit. While some of these works remain preserved in museum collections and archives, I have to admit that from what I found, many have been lost over the past 100 years. In this sense, the early Olympics were kind of like a laboratory for cultural experimentation, testing the limits of international competition and the integration of diverse forms of human excellence. Now, despite all of these notable achievements, the artistic competitions, including poetry, ultimately proved quite unsustainable within the framework of the modern Olympic Games. Several factors contributed to their decline. First, professionalization and commercialization of the Games increasingly marginalized artistic events, which lacked the mass appeal, sponsorship potential, and spectator draw of athletic contests. Second, the persistent challenges of subjective judging, linguistic barriers, and uneven participation created logistical and reputational difficulties, more or less diminishing the credibility of the competitions. Third, the rise of nationalist tensions and politicizing both the sport and culture in the interwar period complicated the international adjudication of artistic work, raising concerns about fairness. By the 1948 London Games, the International Olympic Committee made the decision to discontinue official art competitions, replacing them with non-competitive cultural exhibitions that would showcase artistic achievement without the requirement of medals. Poetry, along with other arts, thus became a ceremonial rather than competitive element of the Games. Hopefully today's episode has inspired you to seek out and learn more about the subject. For answers to questions, sources for today's episode, to leave a comment, or check out upcoming guest announcements, visit www.historyshortspodcast.com or look for History Shorts Podcast on Facebook and X. Stay curious, and I will talk to you all tomorrow.